Excuse me. Have you choked up the second you start talking? Because that happens to me all the time. Anyway, hello. Welcome back to my channel. How are you doing, my darling dears? It's been a little bit. I have zero excuse except for work. And you know what? It's a valid excuse. Because work is tiring. And then I come home and spend the weekends doing things that I didn't want to do during the week. Such as cleaning. So, anyway. I am back today with another chapter. I actually might record 2 or 3 chapters today because I feel really bad about being gone for so long. Anyway, what's been going on in my life? Well, obviously work has been a bitch. I hate it, but, you know, we have to. Haven't won the lottery yet, so, let's see. I spent the night in Lexington. I live in Kentucky. Spent the night in Lexington with my sister. We took our roommates to the airport. So we stayed the night, Friday night, and then dropped them off at the airport early morning, and then went back to the hotel room and slept because it was 4 o'clock in the morning. Why do they do things like that? Schedule flights that early. Anyway, went and hung out with some friends, and then came home, grabbed some Starbucks, went to Buc-ee's. Yeah, it was all around, you know, it was all around a pretty good weekend. Let me think. I have, a question. I want your opinions, because I value them. I value your opinions and your thoughts. And please put your answers in the comments down below. But I've been kind of playing with the idea, mostly because other people have suggested it to me. I've been playing with the idea of maybe putting some sort of like Cash App or something on my YouTube channel. I feel squidgy about it because I don't like asking for money, and I feel like I'm asking for money even if I'm not actually asking for money. You know, I don't want to be one of those YouTubers that like is constantly, you know, asking their followers for money. It just makes me feel squidgy. But, you know, if I did put my Cash App on my profile, would you think less of me? Because, like, I would just use it to get new, like, sound equipment, you know, stuff like the panels that I can put up on my wall, to create, like, a sound barrier, you know, a new microphone, maybe, I don't know, something. Anyway, I wanted to get you guys' opinions. Like I said, I value your thoughts. So, you know, put those opinions down below. If you don't think it's a good idea right now, totally valid, because I actually don't think it's a good idea right now. Because my audience is rather small. And I'm still fairly new at this whole YouTube thing. So, but right now, my recording setup is the corner of my bedroom. And so the walls are like right here, which is fine. It creates, you know, pretty good barrier for sound, but you know, it could probably be better. Anyway, just let me know what you think. We're gonna get into the next chapter, and I'm excited about this because we're actually almost done with the book. I think we only have, let me see here. Let me see. We only have the chapter we're on and 2 more chapters, and then the epilogue and the afterword. So, which the afterword I think is really just a note from the author. Anyway, so I have rambled on long enough. Let's get started on this chapter, because guys, we are almost finished, and I am so excited because the ending of this book, if you couldn't hear that, it was chef's kiss. Anyway, here we go. Also, quick disclaimer, normally I would have some sort of ambient music playing in the background, But I'm an irresponsible adult and forgot to charge my tablet, so we don't have that today. You just have to listen to the ambient noises in the background of my bedroom, which is mostly just a fan. I would say sorry about that, but I'm not really. So, anyway, let's get started, shall we? Chapter 8. Fears. Alanna was happy that summer. During the day, she had lessons and duties, fewer lessons now and more duties, because she was entering her last year as a squire. She had Miles to advise her when Coram wrote with particularly difficult problem at Trebond. She went to Mistress Cooper to talk and to learn more about a woman's life. At night, Jonathan taught her about loving. She was sorry to see the leaves begin to change color. Somehow, she knew her quiet, happy time was not going to last much longer. Delia of Eldorn paced in front of Duke Roger's chair, her green eyes glinting with anger. "I don't understand it," she snapped for the 10th time. "I had him here!" She held out a slender white hand, palm up, before clenching it into a fist. "And now, I suppose I can consider myself privileged if he dances with me once at a party." She threw herself to her knees, in front of Roger's chair, looking up at him prettily. "Master, forgive me," she begged. "I did everything you told me to. He just..." She stopped and looked downward, fluttering her heavy lashes. Roger smiled and reached out, stroking her flowing dark hair. "Don't fret, pretty one," he told her. "That young man is proving very slippery indeed. Fortunately, I have other plans ready to be put into action." "Other plans?" Delia breathed, her eyes wide. "Master, can I help? Can I do anything to assist you? Only tell me." Roger looked off into the distance, still stroking the kneeling girl's hair. "There's nothing you can do for me now," he remarked absently. "The next move on the board is mine." He looked down at her again, his eyes unreadable. "But you must hold yourself ready. If all goes wrong, I will need your help more than ever." "Nothing could go wrong," Delia protested violently. "Not when you have planned it." Duke Roger of Conte smiled again. "Perhaps you are right, my dear," he remarked. "I hope so. In the meantime, be a good child and wait. Give Jonathan to understand that while he is no longer attentive to your attention, your affections remain his." "And your other plans?" Delia whispered. The sorcerer tugged his beard. "You will see," he promised her. "I cannot move carelessly, not yet, but I think you know me well enough to be able to detect what I am doing." He laughed outright. "No one else will be able to. I've made sure of that." And in October, a fever went through the eastern lands, as sickness often did. Few died, although many were ill, and the queen was one of the sickest. Leanne had never been strong, and the fever refused to give her up easily. She recovered at last, but she did not get completely well. During the Queen's illness, Alanna and Jonathan were separated for the first time since Alanna's birthday, as Jonathan sat vigil by his mother's bedside day and night. Their love affair was not the same after that. John was too worried about his mother's health. He was not the only one. Alanna did not like to see the Queen picking at her food and losing weight she did not have to lose. Leanne also developed a cough that refused to go away, despite Duke Baird's best care. "Miles," Alanna began one December night as they were playing chess, "does the Queen's weakness look right to you?" "It looks like it's killing her," Miles frowned. "Is that supposed to look right to me?" Alanna examined a knight thoughtfully. Duke Bed's the finest healer in Total. Why can't he help the Queen? Miles looked sharply at her. This isn't just idle conversation, is it? What's bothering you? Alanna nibbled her thumbnail. I don't like it, she admitted. I saw how much Duke Bed can do at the Drell. He's blessed by the gods. A fever, a cough. Duke Bed can heal those things in a moment, but now he can't. The only other time I saw him this helpless was during the sweating sickness. She moved a pawn forward 1 square. There are some people who think the sweating sickness was caused by a sorcerer. You were one of them, remember? Do you think there's a connection? Miles asked. I don't know what to think, Alanna replied. Then she nodded her head. Yes, I do. And I'm going to say it. Too many bad things happened to Jonathan or to people close to him. I think, Alan, the Queen was never very strong, Miles reminded her. The sweating sickness ruined her health. Her weakness now is probably natural. Think carefully before you make any accusations, please. Miles drew a deep breath. The enemy you will make is too powerful for you to accuse without evidence, and plenty of it. Alanna looked Miles in the eye. You suspect him too. Miles sighed and tugged his beard. I have no proof, Alan. He's too clever to be easily caught. All you have is coincidence. You cannot accuse a man of high treason on coincidence. Demon Grey and his mate weren't coincidences. After weeks of wrestling with herself on the matter, Alanna told her friend about discovering that her token could show her when sorcery had been used. She even let Miles hold it. He examined it briefly and returned it to you. How did you get this? Alanna told him about the meeting in the forest, omitting only that the goddess had spoken to her as a girl. Men were sometimes chosen by the mother, and she couldn't bring herself to tell Miles she had lied about her identity for years. The knight listened, his face expressionless. When she finished, he asked, Is there anything else you think I should know? After keeping her suspicions bottled up for so long, Alanna let them spill out. Duke Gareth's horse had a burn fixed in the saddle blanket when it threw the Duke, and the man who saddled the horse disappeared the same day. The night I was kidnapped by Toussaint, I talked with Duke Roger. He wanted me to be his friend. He said if I was his friend, I'd live to a ripe old age. I told him I wanted my friends to have the same, and I didn't think that was what he wanted. He left, and the fog came up. You remember the fog, and that Faithful couldn't be wakened? Isn't it strange that everything happened after he visited me, and then the one being that could have helped me, my cat, was knocked out magically? The Toussaints were ready for me, Miles. They used special chains on me. Not only that, but they had heard about me, and I wasn't to be released. Who told them so much about me? Jemis? I don't think he knew I had anything more than a healing gift. And didn't you ever wonder why the first major attack launched by the enemy separated Jonathan from all the others? You have no proof, Miles replied steadily. Duke Roger isn't a careless man, Alanna said bitterly. I have only what I've seen and what I think. She got up and poked the fire, her jaw tight with anger. You hate Roger, don't you? Miles asked quietly. He poured them each a glass of wine. Alanna paused, thinking. If hate is wanting to crush someone because you know they're evil, then yes, I hate the Duke of Conte. Miles grasped her by the shoulders. Be careful. He's too powerful to anger. You could easily be the one to die, and no one would know he was to blame. He can do it. You know he can. And if you're out of the way, who will keep him away from Jonathan? He's afraid of you, or he wouldn't have risked exposure to make a friend out of you." Alanna grinned. Miles had just given her an idea. "I think I know someone else he might fear." "Oh, don't be such a ninny," Alex urged as Alanna struggled with the skates. "Surely you ice skated at Trebond?" "Not since I was little," Alanna replied curtly, eyeing the frozen surface before her. Gary and Rawl were racing their squires while Jonathan helped Cynthia of Eldon onto her feet. Another of the Queen's ladies, Gwynin, was laughing merrily as she performed figure eights under the January sun. How had she let herself walk into a stupid bet with Alex? She hadn't ice skated since the time she fell when she was just 5, but everyone had called her chicken, and Jonathan had looked at her with a please in his eyes. And Alex had bet her 10 gold nobles she couldn't get around the pond once without falling. Her noble's pride couldn't refuse such a challenge, even though she had been wary of Alex ever since the mock duel when he had nearly killed her. Her friends applauded as she tottered out onto the ice, faithful yelling encouragement from the land. He had insisted on coming, although, like any sane cat, he hated water, frozen or not. Alanna tried a few steps, relieved to find the ice was firm beneath her. Getting a little bolder, she skated several feet, stopping only to retie a skate lace. Without warning, Joffrey and Satchel swept up behind her and seized her by both arms, taking off with her down the pond's length. Alanna laughed and ordered them to let her go, knowing they wouldn't drop her. Rawl's squire was the best skater in the palace, and Joffrey was quite good for someone born and reared in Persepolis. Grinning, they deposited her in front of Alex. "Well," the young knight grinned, pointing to the ice, "a bet's a bet." Alanna set off doggedly around the edge of the pond, her legs pumping steadily. Once she got into the rhythm of it, she had only to watch for bumps and rough spots in the ice. "This is more fun than I remembered," she thought, reaching the far end of the pond, many yards away from her friends. "Perhaps I should skate more." At the end of the pond, there were several clumps of reeds. She gave them a wide berth, remembering that ice was weaker in such areas. Only a third of the way remained to go when the ice gave way beneath her. She fell into bone-cold water like a stone, biting back a scream of fright. It had happened just this way when she was 5, with the skates pulling her down. She fought to get them off of her feet, holding her breath and cursing the fear of cold that made her wear so many clothes. There, the skates were off her feet, and she was plowing toward the surface again. Her lungs were bursting. Terror rose up, choking her. She forced herself to think, knowing that if she panicked now, she would be dead. Surely the air was just above her. Her hands contacted ice. She groped, trying to find the hole through which she had come, but it was useless. Shivering helplessly in the water, she felt for the emberstone. She didn't even realize it was in her numb hand until its fire blazed out and a hole melted in the ice above her head. She shot to the surface, inhaling a huge gasp of air before her sodden clothes pulled her under. "Once more," she thought grimly. She forced herself to the surface again. This time, strong hands gripped both her arms, and John and Rawl pulled her out onto the ice. "Did someone go for help?" Jonathan asked tensely as he pulled off her jacket. Get his outer clothes off." "The girls went," Gary replied, tugging off Alanna's mittens. "Mithras, Alan, you gave us... Faithful, get away from there!" Alanna tried to turn her head. What's What's he doing? She gasped. Rawl frowned as he tugged off her remaining boot. He's licking the ice. Come on, Alan, let's get you onto dry land. Alanna enjoyed the unique sensation of being carried by someone who handled her as if she were a kitten. Licking the ice? Licking the ice? She asked sleepily. I'll be right there, Jonathan said. He and Alex skated over to the cat. Come on, Faithful, he instructed sternly. You'll worry Alan. Alex was shaking his head. I don't understand. This pond's been frozen solid for weeks. How? Why do animals lick ice? John asked, his voice odd. Carefully, he knelt beside Faithful, keeping an eye on the wide hole in the ice where Alanna had gone through. He rubbed his ungloved hand near the hole and tasted. Someone threw salt on this pot of the ice, he announced slowly. Look how it's pitted and marked, right there. Murder, Alex whispered, looking more closely. But which of us is a murderer's target? Could it be just a very bad idea of a joke? I'm not laughing, Jonathan commented dryly. Are you? Once she had recovered from her ice dunking, Alanna decided to take action. She sent a verbal message, not daring to trust her thoughts to a letter, to Tom through George. She needed her brother's help. Only Roger could have been behind the mishap on the duck pond, and she knew she wanted no more such mishaps happening to her. She had also found it interesting that Alex had been there. Weeks went by without an answer and without a messenger's return. George finally sent out search parties, and in March, Alanna had an answer of sorts. My messenger was slain, George told her. 5 arrows in his back, all poisoned. Someone was taking no chances. Alanna frowned. I have to go myself, she said worriedly. Not now. The mountain passes are snowed in and Jonathan needs me. George forced her to look at him. You're in love with John, aren't you? He asked softly. And me a blind fool not to have seen it before. Alanna shook him off. I don't know what love is, she said uncomfortably. At least, not the kind you're talking about. The forever kind? George laughed and shook his head. Lass, when will you learn to see what's before your nose? Alanna reached up and tweaked George's own nose. When I have something to see, she teased, so stop trying to make me see something that isn't there. George smiled. You're a stubborn youngling, he told her. It's one of your charms. And if you're planning any ride to the city of the gods, I'm going with you. He silenced her protest by putting a large hand over her mouth. Didn't you hear me before? 5 poison-tipped arrows in my man, and it's as well for you he carried a message rather than a letter. He was searched, his things spread all over the snow. It's good we've had a cold winter. Everything was frozen just as it was when they killed him. So miss, like it or no, I go with you when you visit your brother. Alanna made a face and kept quiet. When the time came, she would get away without George. She could take care of herself. Jonathan did not want her to go, but Alanna rode for the city of the gods in early April, leaving Faithful with strict instructions to watch the prince and to get Miles if anything happened. Saddling Moonlight before dawn, she slipped out of the palace. Few people, no rogues, were about in the city. She thought she had fooled George, since she had given no more than a day and a half's warning of her departure. She was wrong. The thief was waiting for her at the gates, dressed for riding and mounted on a sturdy bay. Jonathan told you, she accused her friend. No, Stefan keeps messenger birds. I've got you under tight watch, youngling. It's well for you that I do." Since there was nothing she could do, Alanna laughed and fell in beside George. Would she ever be able to outwit him? The ride north was a good one. George was witty and entertaining. He had some wonderful stories to tell. They stopped at Trebond for a night. Coram was shocked to see the company Alanna kept and read her a strong lecture, but Alanna shrugged it off. Instead, she spent time with the young man Coram was training as his replacement. He was a nice fellow, with a small family and some education. Alanna knew when she was done talking to him that he would serve her as faithfully as Coram did. Plans were made for Coram to come to the palace in November in order to be there when Alanna underwent the ordeal. Alanna and George rode into the city of the gods. Alanna sighed warily when they finally arrived before the city's great walls. Gray mountains, bare of almost any greenery, stretched for leagues around, making for a dull, tiring ride. "How can Tom live in such a cursed, ugly place?" she asked George. "I'd go mad if I had to look at this all the time." "He probably doesn't notice," her friend replied. "Most scholars don't." The warrior priests who manned the gates showed them to the Mithrin cloisters. As they passed the convent of the Mother of Mountains, Alanna shuddered. She had almost spent 6 years behind those walls. Now more than ever, she appreciated her escape. An orange-robed initiate admitted them to the cloisters. Novices took their horses. An ancient yellow man in the black and gold robes of a master tottered out to greet them. "We are honored to have you among us, Squire Allen, Freeman Cooper," he said. "I am Seacham, chief of the masters here." Alanna bowed very low. As a sorcerer, Seacham would be nearly as powerful as Duke Roger. As a priest, he was the head of the cult of Mithros for all of the eastern lands. "We would be honored if you would join us for our evening meal," this friendly old man went on. "We get little news of the world." "We'd be honored to come," George said. "Excellent, excellent. Follow me, if you please. I do not believe Adept Tom is expecting you." Alanna smiled grimly. "I wanted to surprise him." Seacham looked sharply at her before knocking on one of the many doors lining a long hallway. "Do you think much surprises Adept Tom?" Before Alanna could answer such an astonishing question, Tom opened the door. He was bearded, taller, older. He hugged Alanna with enthusiasm, crying, "Brother dear!" Seeing Alanna's companion, Tom widened his violet eyes. "Not George Cooper?" He grinned. "The same," George replied, extending his hand. "I've heard a thing or two about you myself." "Surely some of it was good," Tom quipped, shaking the offered hand. He looked at Master Seacham as Alanna dazedly realized. He knew we were coming. He wasn't surprised at all. "Their things have been taken to the guest wing." The master's voice was warm and friendly a moment ago, was suddenly chilly. "And they have accepted an invitation to take the evening meal with us." Tom lifted a single coppery eyebrow. "Oh," he asked, his voice too sweet. "Then I will have to join you, won't I?" "It will be a change." The man's voice was as dry as autumn leaves. "I will leave you to talk now." He hurried away down the long hall. Alanna was confused. "I don't get it. He was very friendly a moment ago." They've been angry with me ever since I stopped playing the idiot and passed the written examinations for mastery. Come in, sit down. Wine?" Tom rang a bell, and a servant, in the white robes of a novice, came in. He gave the boy orders, pretending not to notice that Alanna and George were staring at him. When the novice was gone, Alanna sat down hard. Most would-be masters did not even try for that title until they were at least 30. You passed the written examinations for mastery? Her voice emerged from her throat in a squeak. 2 weeks ago. It was easier than you think. Tom shrugged, motioning George to take the chair beside Alanna while he sat in the third. All that's left are the spoken examinations and the ordeal of sorcery. You call that all? Alanna demanded weakly. Tom laughed at her shock. I was ready for this more than a year ago, and now they can't wait for me to finish and get out of here. I make them nervous. The wine came. Alanna drank hers in one gulp and poured another glass, while George told Tom about their ride to the city of the gods. When Alanna was calmer, Tom turned back to her. Now, what brings you to me the moment the pass is clear? Or rather, sister, what brings you? I believe I guessed correctly when I say George came to protect you. George smiled and sipped his wine. Truth to tell, I came for the ride. Surely you know that Alanna can take care of herself. Tom smiled cruelly. You came to protect her from a certain smiling gentleman, he said. Or did you think I'd forgotten him? He hasn't forgotten me. There are 2 people watching me here. It's just as well you're getting your mastery then, isn't it? Alanna shrugged. If Tom could be matter-of-fact about it, so could she. I need you at the palace. Do you indeed? Don't take that arch tone with me, brother, she said tartly. I used to duck you in the fish pond. I'll try to do it again if you make me angry. This is too important. Tom laughed. So serious. All right, what's the problem? They talked until the bells called them to the evening meal, and then they talked again until very late. Alanna wanted Tom in the palace to watch over Jonathan when she left. Tom did not refuse. He wanted to live well at court for a while. With the more important question settled, Alanna and George told Tom everything they knew or suspected about Duke Roger. Alanna had the only surprise for either man as she explained about the Ember Stone. She finished telling her brother about the test she had performed on the charm and sat back yawning tiredly. She could remember the watch had called midnight, but that had been at least an hour ago. George shook his head, smiling ruefully. Have you more surprises for me, then? He asked gently. Don't be silly, she replied. I would have told you before, but the time was never right. It's not something I think I should talk much about. Tom stood and looked down at her. One of the gods himself, he remarked softly. What I wouldn't give to have been there with you. I wish you had been there with me, Alanna said frankly. I was scared to death, except maybe she wouldn't have talked to me if you had been there. Tom stretched out his hand. Let me see it. Her eyes were on her twins. Alanna slowly pulled the chain over her head. The Ember Stone swung in the air, its inner fire burning. Tom took it, holding it up before his eyes. Does the glow give you away at night? He asked absent-mindedly. Alanna could see his mind wasn't on her, but on the problems and questions posed by the goddess's token. This was Tom's other face, his scholar's face, the one he wore when he was tracking down some ancient spell in rotting scrolls and half-burned books. No? She replied, feeling a little forlorn. This was a place her twin went where she couldn't follow. It burns inside, but it doesn't burn, if you know what I mean. George, seeing the loneliness on her face, stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders. She smiled up at him gratefully. Was there anything George didn't understand about her? Fascinating, Tom whispered. Suddenly, his face tightened. He threw the charm into the air and pointed at it, shouting a word neither Alanna nor George knew. There was a great soundless explosion. The room rocked, and Alanna grabbed George to keep him from falling. All around the cloister's lamps flared up, and men shouted questions. Alanna glared at Tom. Shrugging, her brother handed back the ember stone. The chain was gone. A small bead of molten gold clung to the stone's crystal exterior. "No damage," Tom reassured her. Alanna got her wind back. No! No damage!" she yelled furiously. "What did you do to it?" "He used a word of command," a dry voice from the doorway. Seacham, wearing a crumpled dressing gown over sleeping robes, stood there. "Is the thing of immortal origin?" Wordlessly, Alanna handed the ember stone over, mentally promising to get Tom for putting her in this position. The yellow man examined the stone for a moment before handing it back. "He commanded it to give up its secrets," the master explained. "Only a thing made by the immortals could resist such a command. And as I see, this has. You shouldn't give your brother such dangerous toys to play with, Squire Allen." Seacham glanced at Tom. "I suppose you realize you've disrupted a number of very delicate spells some of the masters have been working on. It will take many of them weeks to repair the damage." Tom shrugged. "It was necessary," he said coolly. "I had to learn how powerful it was." "I see." Seacham's smile was small and grim. "Very well. To teach you the virtues of warning your fellow scholars when you are about to play with the basic forces of nature, your ordeal of sorcery shall be set to right the work you destroyed tonight." The ancient master nodded to Alanna. "Until tomorrow, Squire Allen." Alanna turned to her brother, so when the door closed behind Seacham, "Couldn't you make friends with them?" she wanted to know. "I like Master Seacham, and the others." Tom shook his head. "They're afraid of me because I'm better than they are. They'd hate me even if I went out of my way to be good to them. I'm certainly not going to do that." Alanna frowned, worried. "You're going to be very lonely," she said frankly. Tom laughed. "I have the gift. That's enough for me." "I wonder. It doesn't seem as if it would be enough." She remembered what the goddess had said about learning to love. Tom would have a lonely life without love or friendship. She, at least, had friends. Was it possible she had learned to love as well? They spent another day at the cloisters, talking to the others while Tom studied and conferring further with Tom. When Alanna and George left at dawn the next day, Alanna knew her powerful brother would soon come to help her protect Jonathan, that at least she looked forward to it. It would take a great burden off her shoulders. They rode for half a day in silence, Alanna thinking about Tom. George waited to break the silence until they halted for the noon meal. Your brother's an interesting fellow." "That he is," Alanna laughed shortly. "He'll be powerful protection for John. You can go adventuring without another thought." Alanna nodded. George watched her for a moment before adding, "Was he always so proud?" Alanna raised miserable eyes to her friends. "I don't know," she admitted. I don't think so. He was different when we went home to bury our father. I could see then he was turning hard. I suppose that as powerful as he is, he's every right to be proud. Not everyone can harness so much magic. I never tried. I was afraid to." "A wise kind of fear," George pointed out. "Besides, what would you be? A fine warrior and a great sorcerer?" "It's not that," Alanna protested, realizing George thought she might be a little jealous. "It's that he seems so lonely, and he doesn't even realize it. George raised his eyebrows. Do I believe my ears? Alanna, the heartless, talking for love instead of against it. Don't tease George. He's my brother. I love him. He knows that, George said, hugging her around the shoulders. And I know I, for one, envy him. Now, eat up. We've got a long ride home. This time, they did not stop at Trebond. They rode past Trebond Way, Alanna stopping only for a moment to look toward her home. More and more, the palace felt like home to her, and Trebond was only a place on the map. It was sunset the day after they passed Trebond, and they still had a few leagues to go before reaching the next way house. It was George who sensed trouble, pulling his bay up short. His nostrils flared as if he was sniffing the wind. Unless my city-bred nose betrays me, he broke off with a cry of pain. An ugly black arrow sprouted from his collarbone. Men were pouring out of the trees surrounding them. "Ride on!" cried George between gritted teeth. Moonlight reared, flailing with her hooves at the two ruffians who tried to grab her reins. George yanked a dagger from its sheath and hurled it into the man's throat. "Ride!" he yelled as four more swarmed down upon them. "No!" Alanna cried fiercely. She rode Moonlight straight at a man who was putting an arrow to his bow. The mare trampled him ruthlessly as Alanna drew lightning, slashing at a third attacker. George drew his own sword to kill the man who was trying to pull him from his saddle. His face was pale, and Alanna remembered with horror that the first messenger to Tom had been slain with poisoned arrows. With a yell of fury, she cut down two men who were trying to herd her away from George. Wheeling Moonlight, she saw George fling his second dagger into an attacker's shoulder. George pulled his bay to a halt, his face white in the gathering darkness. "Never mind me," he gasped. "The arrow's not poisoned. Find out from that one what you can." He pointed to the man he had just wounded, the only attacker still standing. Alanna cut the killer off as he tried to run, kicking him down before she dismounted. Furious, she leveled her sword at the man's throat. He stared at her, trying to inch away. "Hold still," Alanna yelled, her voice cracking with rage. This animal and his friends had hurt George. "Who sent you? Who?" "You weren't to be hurt," the ruffian babbled, his eyes wide with terror. "I want the boy alive," was told, and him never saying you was a killer, and the man too. "That'll be easy game. Just bring the boy and kill the man, and there's gold in it for you. That's what we was told." "Who told you?" Alanna roared. The man opened his mouth and tried to speak. He made little choking noises as large beads of sweat rolled off his face. Suddenly, he turned pale and screamed, clawing at invisible hands on his throat. His eyes rolled up and he collapsed, dead. Quickly, Alanna fumbled for the ember stone under her clothing. She gripped it and instantly saw traces of orange fire vanishing from the man's body. "Sorcery," she whispered. She turned to look at George. Her friend was swaying in the saddle. There was no time to waste. Alanna grabbed a length of rope from her saddlebags and tied George to his horseback. Mounting Moonlight, she gave the man her brandy flask while she examined the wound. The shaft had passed through the muscle of George's shoulder. The arrowhead stood clear out of his back. Steeling herself, Alanna cut the arrow's feathers away and pulled the shaft through the wound. The thief fainted against her as she worked, and she could only be thankful. Leaning George forward on his horse, Alanna took the other animal's reins and set off into the night. It seemed like forever came and went before they reached the way house. Once there, Alanna snapped orders to the hostlers, watching anxiously as they drew George off his horse's back and carried him inside. She brushed aside the The innwife's offer to send for a healer, explaining briefly that she was a healer herself. A room was quickly prepared for them, and a maid fetched brandy, boiling water, and clean linens for bandages. Alanna worked to clean and bind up the wound, putting her most powerful healing magic to it. Then, exhausted by the fight and the magic, she watched George late into the night. She didn't like his color. He'd lost so much blood. "Don't die on me, please," she whispered when the clock struck midnight and he still had not moved. "It's only a little shoulder wound. Goddess, George, don't die on me." His eyes flickered open, and he smiled. "I didn't know you cared," he whispered. "And why insult me? I won't die for a wee nick like this. I've had worse in my day." Alanna wiped her wet cheeks. "Of course I care, you unprincipled pickpocket," she whispered. "Of course I care." Faithful woke Alanna shortly after dawn on her 18th birthday. "Wake up and get dressed," the cat told her. "You don't want the surprise they've planned to be a surprise for them as well as for you. Jonathan says to hurry." Alanna was tucking her shirt into her breeches when the prince rapped on her door. "Are you decent, squire?" he demanded. Alanna yanked the door open. "I'm always decent, overlord," she replied. Then she saw that Gary, Rawl, and Alex were with him. "Isn't it a little early for this?" she asked plaintively. They filed into her room, each carrying a bulky package. "That's all right, Grouch," he said, thumping her shoulder. "Happy birthday." The young men piled their packages onto the bed. Then they turned to look at Jonathan. He glared back at them. "I thought Rawl was going to tell Alan." "You talk better than I do," Rawl said. "What they're trying not to tell you," Gary said patiently, "is that we've discussed it. We decided our hero-to-be should be properly outfitted." He gestured to the packages on the bed. "The gifts are from all of us, and their majesties, and my father. Duke Bed, Douglas, Joffrey, Satchel. Did I forget anyone?" "I don't think so." "Miles said he was damned if he would get up at this hour, but if you went to the stables, you'll find something from him," Rawl added. Jonathan handed Alanna the largest, heaviest package. "Go on," he urged as she simply stared at it. "It's for you." The package contained the lightest male shirt Alanna had ever handled, washed with gold. The other packages held a gold-washed helmet, a belt made of gold wire, picked out with amethyst, soft kid riding gloves, a gold-trimmed sheath for lightning and a matching dagger, a gold-washed male leggings to match the shirt. Alanna opened all of the gifts silently. The smallest package was from her quote-unquote cousin George, containing a black opal ring set in pale gold. She looked at them, awed and frightened by this show of affection. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Jonathan advised. "Go take a look at Moonlight." Miles's gift was a complete outfitting for the mare, made of well-worked leather trimmed with gold. Moonlight voiced her pleasure with a high-pitched whinny, while Faithful set in a special cup for him attached to the saddle, purring with contentment. Alanna had to cry with happiness, but she hid her face in Moonlight's mane. No one noticed. No one would accept her thanks either. The other young men ordered her to be quiet, or, if she had to express appreciation, to do so by teaching them the words to the bawdy songs she had learned from the men of Fort Drell. "Why are you so confused?" Jonathan asked her late that night. "Can't you see we all love you and want you to succeed, even if you insist on leaving us?" They'll hate me more than ever when they find out the truth, Alanna said miserably. Nonsense. And haven't you thought that some of them may have guessed by now? Alanna looked at her friend and lover. Miles, she whispered. I bet he knows. Jonathan decided not to say anything about the very odd conversation he had had with Miles the day after the Toussaint kidnapped Alanna. Why not ask him? He replied instead. Alanna was thinking about this when she remembered something else. Jonathan, I have to have 2 knights instruct me in the code of chivalry while I take the purifying bath before the ordeal. What am I going to do? I suggest you tell Cousin Gary. Jonathan yawned, falling onto his bed. He'll think it's a wonderful joke. And I think we can instruct you in the code after you bathe. Alanna grinned, lying down beside him. You just don't want Gary to see me bare. You're right, I don't. Do you? Jonathan asked suspiciously, looking into her eyes. When Alanna only giggled, Jonathan repeated, Do you? You're very jealous for someone who isn't serious about me. She grinned. Jonathan made her look at him. I am serious. In my way, he said quietly. But if I talked of love to you, you'd run off. Don't, Jonathan, please. She whispered. See what I mean? He yawned again. Relax. I certainly can't talk about marriage in any case. I don't want to talk about marriage, she cried. I don't want to talk about love. Jonathan silenced her with a hand over her mouth. I love you, Alanna, she said firmly. Ignore it if you want to, but I do love you. He pulled the covers over them. Now go to sleep. Alanna lay awake for a long time, wishing he hadn't said it, and glad that he had. She was going away when she became a knight. Nothing could change that. He would have to take a marriage that would be good for the kingdom. Nothing could change that either. And yet, she thought he was asleep. I love you, Jonathan, she whispered. A long arm snaked around her and he pulled her against his side. I know, he said. I just wanted to be sure you knew it too. Oh my gosh, you guys! Okay, so that was that was our chapter called Fears. It was so good. So what is in this recap? Shall we? First of all, Jonathan, a little bit of a fuckboy, not gonna lie. He kind of wigs me out. Because he's like, at the end there, he's like, I love you, and she's like, you know, I love you too, and he's like, I know. But like, he's been in like multiple not really relationships, you know, just, he's slept with a lot of people, right, a lot of women. And this is the first time that that Alanna has been in, or any sort of, you know, physical relationship with somebody. And he's like making all these assumptions, and I don't know, I'm not comfy with it. I love George. I love that he's so supportive of her. He lets her do her own thing. You know, he only supports her when she needs it. You know, like with her brother, standing behind him when he saw loneliness in her eyes. The fact that her brother was so distant with her. Which, you know, obviously Tom loves his sister. You know, when you have a sibling that's that close to you, either twin or like mine and my sister, where we're super close in age, literally, we're the same age for a month and a half every year. Like this year she'll turn 33, and then for a month and a half we'll be 33 together, and then I'll turn 34. Like that's how close we are in age. So when you have somebody that's that close to you, it's hard to not love them with everything in your being, right? If I had to choose anyone, between anyone and my sister, it'd probably be my sister every time, right? So he obviously loves her, but he loves his power as well. You know, it's one of those dynamics. Honestly, Duke Rogers getting real sloppy though. He's getting he's getting really, really messy with how he's trying to handle Alanna. And that straight up comes from fear. He is so afraid of her because even though she's afraid of him, she keeps going. And which, we all have to applaud, We do love her for that. We love a persistent queen. Anyway, that was our chapter. That was our chapter. I am excited to read the next one, so I think I'm going to take a break, maybe eat some food, and then come back and record the next chapter. I have not pre-read these chapters. Usually I pre-read them before I record them, just so I kind of know the feel of, what's going on before I record. But on these ones, because we're so close to the end, I'm not going to do that. So if it sounds a little bit different, that's why. Anyway, I'm going to take my phone off airplane mode and upload this right away. So be ready for the next chapter. Okay, I love you. Bye.